Who told you you are naked? That's what God asked when he was searching for the man and the woman after they had eaten from the tree of knowledge of consent, and they recognized that they weren't clothed. And God was searching. He said, "Where are you?" And they replied, "We're naked." So we hid. Out of embarrassment and out of fear, the man did what so many others have done when they are afraid. He ran away, and then he blamed somebody else for his action. In this case, he ran to the only place he could. He had to run within the garden. There was nowhere else to go. And he blamed the only other person around, his wife. The woman. I was pointing to you, I'm sorry. It's her fault. Her fault. She gave me of the tree, and I ate. And the man blamed another for his action. This is a myth. We know that. It's a story. It's an ancient legend written by our ancestors. But it's about the power of it. The reason it resonates, it touches a nerve. The great thing about quality mythology and myths is they resonate over the ages because they speak to human experiences. When people are afraid, they run and they hide. That's something that we know. When people are afraid, they run, they hide, and sometimes they blame others. Clearly, there's a conversation to be had about how women have been made scapegoats throughout history and frequently are treated as less in our society. That's not the path I'm going to go down today. Not because I don't think it's important, but because I think there's also another element about fear in here that I want to explore. Sexism is real, and that's a conversation that we've had before and can continue to have. But this also myth touches about fear, the power of fear, unreasoned, unthinking, primal fear that drives action, and in the process can be corrosive. It seems to me that the myth touches this reality that intuitively we all know that our first instinct often is to act out of fear, this deep emotion that can overwhelm us. It can paralyze us. It can cause us to flee. We may have even studied it in our Psychology 101 when we were students, fight or flight. The innate response takes over even before the reasoning side of our brain kicks in. The biblical authors captured how fear can shape the way we act and respond, hiding in the bushes. They came to this knowledge not through research. They didn't, subject students to tests and have forms to fill out that said you give permission to have psychological tests done. They did it because they looked around. They watched what people did, and they saw the instinctual behavior that we have. When there is fear, we hide. When there is fear, we can be paralyzed. We recognize it because it's a good story. We recognize it because there's something innately true about their understanding. Well, modern research adds to our understanding of fear. It's shedding new light, expanding what the authors intuitively know. Research in the nature of fear reveals that from an evolutionary standpoint, it was essential as a survival tool. But from our modern vantage point, how fear manifests today can be incredibly harmful and very counterproductive. Dan Gardner, an author, wrote a book called Risk, The Science and Politics of Fear. And in it, he examined the nature of fear. He recognized and did the research, other people had done it, he was aggregating it actually, that fear, our response to fear, comes out of our long evolutionary experience, right? We have been around for tens of thousands of years on this earth. And for most of our history, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. That's where our brain was formed and when it was formed and how we learned to respond to fear. We responded, and that evolutionary wiring was done at a time when the world was far simpler. And he argues, as others, that our minds are simply not equipped to process the complexity of modern living. especially where risk is concerned. And there's something adds to this challenge. It's a lot easier for us to respond to a story than it is to a statistic. So if we hear about an earthquake, or a fire, or a shooting, or a break-in, even though the probability of that specific event happening to us is very low, we still respond with the thought, this could happen to me. The story has more impact upon us than the statistical realities of the world in which we live. Just flying, one of the safest forms of transportation. When we hear about a plane crash, we jump in our cars thinking we'll be safer, even though driving is far less safe. It's the same for crime or terrorism or any other number of low probability events. When we hear about it, it touches the most primitive part of our brains, and we respond out of fear, deep primal fear. Apparently, the research shows that we have been taught through evolution to prioritize the stories because, unlike statistics, our imaginations can process it into something resembling personal experience. That's probably why a good story still resonates. It makes sense to us intuitively, where the statistics are much more complicated. Additionally, Gardner observes, there's another instinctual behavior that, while helping us while we were roaming the savannah, can be problematic in a complex society. It's called the rule of typical things, or that element, that ability to make snap judgments, stereotypes, prejudice. Snap decisions can be very helpful when you're roaming the savannah and you get a glimpse of something black and orange out of the corner of your eyes. It saved a lot of our ancestors from being eaten by tigers. But in a complex and multi-ethnic society, snap judgments may hinder rather than help. Unfortunately, Gardner observes, our instincts need only the slightest excuse to overrule our heads. It seems that modern research and the biblical story we read come out of two very different places. One comes from just observing the human experience. The other is doing research into the human experience. How fear can motivate, influence, undermine. That while fear at times may have helped us, unchecked, it has the power to overwhelm and override our ability to reason and respond. The Roman philosopher and rhetoric teacher Lactantius wrote, "Where fear is present, wisdom cannot be." Seems to me that we are living at a time of great fear. It motivates actions and policies, and rather than solving it, oftentimes perpetuates the problem. We're living in an age of a 24-hour news cycle that grabs our attention, and if the research is correct, we're drawn to the stories. We want to see them. And as many advertisers know, if you can make people fear, they are likely to buy protection. And we live in a global society where we need people and family and friends all around the world. Distant events are not nearly as distant, for we realize they're touching people we may know, and we internalize it as if it is touching ourselves. A world with a heightened sense of fear can become a dangerous place, for in it, reason is sacrificed, and conversations between people become more rare. I was thus deeply moved during our trip to Israel, our community trip. Our group, our congregation Beth Adam, our interfaith trip, we had the unique experience to be in a very small setting and listen to two people tell two very powerful stories. One was an Israeli father whose daughter was killed in a terrorist attack about a decade ago when she was an adolescent. The other was a Palestinian woman whose husband had been shot by an Israeli soldier and killed while he was sitting in his car in traffic. Both knew the pain of loss. Both had someone dear to them die in the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Both had reason to be angry, reason to fear, to look at the other and seek revenge. But rather than hate or anger or fear, they shared a deeper and perhaps a more powerful emotion: grief. They grieve for their loss, and rather than seeing each other as enemies, they refer to one another as my brother, as my sister. They're part of an organization known as Parent Circle, the forum of bereaved Palestinian and Israeli families for peace and reconciliation. The conversation that those in this organization are having with one another aren't in the abstract. Everyone in this group has had someone near and dear to them die as a result of the conflict. Yet their sorrow motivates each of them to reach out and try to understand one another. For me, meeting and hearing them was very powerful and incredibly challenging. I tried to put myself in their position. Could I, if one of my loved ones was killed in that conflict, a conflict that started decades ago and seems like it has no end, could I find within myself the ability to reach out? To use my sorrow to motivate conversation versus my hate and anger to seek revenge? As I listened, I reflected back that about a week before we were sitting in that room, we had been in Tel Aviv, at what is known now as Rabin Square. We were literally standing where Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by an extremist, angered by his decision to try to create peace. And I thought about Rabin speaking at the White House in 1993, when he stood on the lawn of the White House trying to sign the agreement, a peace agreement. He spoke out of a very different place. He didn't speak out of fear or anger, but he spoke with pain, and he had a reason for trying to sign this peace agreement. I want to read a piece of this. It's longer typically than I would typically read in a talk like this. But I want you to put yourself back. 1993, Yitzhak Rabin, a soldier, standing on the lawn of the White House, facing one of his greatest enemies, willing to sign a peace agreement. Rabin said, "This signing of the Israeli-Palestinian Declaration of Principle here today isn't so easy. Neither for myself as a soldier in Israel's war, nor for the people of Israel, not to the Jewish people in the diaspora who are watching us now with great hope, mixed with apprehension. It's certainly not easy for the families of the victims of the war's violence, terror, whose pain will never heal, for the many thousands who defended our lives in their own, and have even sacrificed their lives for our own. For them, this ceremony has come too late. Let me say to you, the Palestinians, we are destined to live together on the same soil in the same land. We, the soldiers who have returned from battle stained with blood. We who have seen our relatives and friends killed before our eyes, who have attended their funerals and cannot look in the eyes of their parents. We who have come from a land where parents bury their children. We who have fought against you, the Palestinian, we say today in a loud and a clear voice, enough blood and tears, enough. Whether it was Rabin or these people in the family circle, they all had reasons to act out of instinctual fear, to blame the other, to throw up barricades, to seek revenge. But there was a realization among all of them that violence won't stop until there is dialogue. until we stop responding out of fear, but out of a hope that the future can be different. These people were doing something incredibly moving beyond their fare to find another way. All of us in the room that day were touched by the power of their stories. For me, it challenged me. Is it possible to move beyond fear? Can we do it together, or are we forever trapped in our instinct? What if more people were like them? What if more people were willing to reach out to those we're angry with or fear? How could the world be different if people acted upon hope and with reason? There are no simple antidotes to fear, given its strength and power, given that it's literally woven into our wiring. But in the modern world, where the instincts may no longer be serving us as well, we have to respond. We need to think about this notion of fear. And there are things I believe we can do. I saw it with the family circle. They were able to do it. I saw it in Rabin's word. They may not be fully successful, but they attempted a reach. We need to recognize and appreciate the importance and value of reason and rationality to overcome fear. That we look at statistics to see how things actually are, not how we imagine them they are. That we allow our instinct and rational sides to engage and respond to the fear that we're feeling, rather than allowing our unchecked emotions to run roughshod over our responses. It's more complex in our communal situations, but we need to do it together. And we need to rely on those who specialize in complex technical areas. We need to look to them for their advice and their insights. Too often we discount the scholar because they deal in statistics rather than stories. We need to listen to them because they have insights that we do not have. Too often the expert is ignored on the altar of everyone having an opinion because we have opinions because we have experiences. Sometimes our opinions are wrong, and we have no basis other than I experienced one event. Those who are trained and process information should be able to give us guidance. We need to listen to the expert while never abdicating our own responsibility to have to make our own choices. Thomas Jefferson long ago recognized the linkage between tragedy and the absence of reason when he wrote, "Man, once surrendering his reason, has no remains guard against absurdities, the most monstrous. Man, once surrendering his reason, has no remains guarded against absurdities the most monstrous. And like a ship without a rudder is a sport of every wind." We need reason. We need to allow our reason to rise up and rely upon it. When we first begin to think about fear, we need to step back and use our minds. But reason alone is not the solution. We also need hope. Hope isn't a naive concept. It is the belief that the future can be better. If we give up on hope, that change is possible, then we give up on our future and we give up on our descendants. I'm not willing to give up on my children or my grandchildren or your children or your grandchildren or your nieces or nephew. I am not willing to give up on the generations yet to come. I'm not willing to give up on hope. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who was the former chief rabbi in Israel or in England, said, "Judaism is humanity's faith in the future tense. The Jewish voice is the voice of an extinguishable hope." It seems to me that this is the core of Yom Kippur, that the future can be different. If we don't think the future can be different, why did we show up here today? If we think the future is fixed, we should all just go home. Turn off the stream, put our heads in the sand, and cover ourselves up and wait for the end to show up. But if you showed up, if you're watching online, if you're part of this, then you actually believe that hope is a reality and that change is possible. That's what coming here is an affirmation of. That is what Yom Kippur is about. We do not have to live in the past. We have a future ahead. We are a people who have hope. It's infused in the vision of what it's meant to be Judaism. We talk about it, whether in traditional Judaism and modern Judaism, old Judaism, new Judaism. Talk about tikkun olam, repairing the world. We talk about the possibility of a better world, lifting up the fallen, healing the sick, giving shelter to those who are homeless, feeding the hungry. Those are visions of a world. Our ancestors spoke about it generations ago. We're still struggling, and we're getting closer. We are doing better. Believing in hope isn't naive. It is a way to respond to the world. The fact is, the world is better than it used to be. Fewer people are living in extreme poverty. Literacy is declining. Life expectancy is going up. The statistics, when you look at them, demonstrate that we are moving forward, not in a straight line, and not everywhere exactly at the same time, but we are living at one of the best times, if not the best time in human history. We will live longer and healthier lives than our ancestors ever have. We are living less under a specter of fear than we've really ever have, though we don't understand it, because statistics aren't being heard, only stories. We respond to fear, remembering that each of us leaves a legacy. No matter our status, no matter our age, no matter our job, no matter our income, everyone is a participant in the world that we are living in. There are no sidelines in life. This is not a sport where we get to watch and cheer two teams. We are on the field, everyone. The only person who's no longer part of the world, a participant, is someone who has died. Everybody is involved in making the world a better place. Sometimes we say, I'm only one person. What does it matter? I think we need to change that to say, I'm one person, and yes, it matters. I have a voice. I have a conscience. I have a responsibility. And each one of us, has the ability to affect change and to have our voices heard. Each of us has the opportunity to make our communities more livable. Each of us has the opportunity to stand up when we hear someone saying something that we find offensive, not to giggle, but to stand up and say, that offends me. To defend people who are being marginalized, even when we are not being marginalized. Each of us have been in a room like that. Each of us has seen it happen. We have a responsibility to act because each of us leaves a legacy, a mark, and we can't hide from that reality or that responsibility. Abraham Heschel, Jewish philosopher, once said, people, if they could look back at the end of their life, would be frightened by the power that they had. You know what? Let's not wait to the end of our lives to look back and say, wow, what could I do? Why don't we look at our lives right now and say, look what I can do. I can do something. Every person has the ability to affect change, and to abdicate that responsibility is abdicating part of why we have a chance to make the world better. And we're all in this together. We're in this together. It's interesting. I started out talking about the biblical story. So it's an interesting question rabbis once asked. Why does the Bible begin with creation? It's a Jewish book. Why don't you just begin with the creation of the Jews? Abraham, Lech Lecha, we heard that sung beautifully just a little bit ago. Why doesn't it begin with Lech Lecha when God tells Abraham to go forth from Ur and start a new people? Why doesn't it start at Sinai? God gives the Torah. The people, our ancestors, also instinctually know something that we all know. That every human being, no matter their race, their religion, their gender, sexuality, place of origin, you name it, we're all connected. They wrote that story to tell us that. We may not like how the story was particularly fashioned, But they understood every human being is connected. We don't like the biblical story? Look over my head, the Big Bang. You're right, evolution. We all evolved from the muck. We're all one species. And we live on this little blue dot, floating in a universe that's 14.5 billion years old. And we have no other place to go. Everything that has ever happened, every story you have ever heard, every person you've ever read about, everything you have learned about history has happened on this planet. And to this point, we have no way of getting off here. And the planet isn't big enough to run away. Diseases that once were isolated in far reaches of the world are transported with less than 24 hours on the plane. Information moves in a second, and those we fear can move around the world as well. Science reminds us, and our ancestors remind us, that we are all connected, that we are in this together. We are not siloed. And Rami said something to me, or said something to all of us. He talked about walls, because in Israel there's a wall. And it kept him from going, not only did it keep terrorists out, but it meant that people couldn't travel as easily. And he made an observation that I've held in my heart since that day. He said, a wall will not keep out the terrorist, excuse me. A wall will not keep out the terrorist or the peacemaker. We live together, not in sideload communities. We have to work together. Well, you know the rest of the story, the biblical story. The man, the woman, eventually came out of hiding, and they were forced to leave the garden. They didn't have a choice about their future. We do. Our future is neither determined by a divine hand, nor does it have to be defined by our unthinking response to fear. Our future depends on us living up to our better selves, using our gift of reason and our capacity of hope to build a brighter tomorrow. The new year awaits our decision.